Oh, okie dokie, fellow coder, let's get into this next one. So, as promised, let's start to get into more of the good stuff, which is in the actual service itself, where we are going to take the response that we got and actually do something useful with that response. So first, let's do a high-level overview of what we actually want to accomplish. So the first thing, I think what we want to do is check to see if this lead, which is just the another word for a person's contact information, check to see if this lead already exists. Right, that's the first thing we want to do. Although I guess we're iterate through response first, right? And then number two, as you're iterating, check to see if lead already exists. 2A, if lead exists, then there's a few things we can do. Either ignore it, or post a message to Slack, post a modified or a variation of the message, right? A modified message to Slack to just basically say, hey, it looks like this lead's already come in, but maybe they came in a few days ago and now they're opting in again, right? If they're coming in again and showing interest again, then that means something, right? Maybe we should reach out to them again. So I'd let my team know that this person has shown interest. But if the lead, certain times when we want to ignore it is when this is just a duplicate lead type of thing. And you'll see what I mean when we start to work with the actual, the mock API, well, not the mock API, but the real API. Oh, I just realized there are parameters that we need to pass in. Shoot. So we also need to look at that. Okay, anyway, one thing at a time. So if the lead exists, and let's say, the created date is, within the range of the querying date, then ignore it, or otherwise post a modified message to Slack. So I'll get into what that means in a bit, maybe in the next episode. So that's if the lead exists. If lead doesn't exist, then persist it to the database and post a message to Slack. So that's sort of a high level of what we want to be doing here. Okay. Now I'm realizing there are parameters for when we call the API. The first one is the we need to have a header that has the API key. So there's a key that goes along here. And then there's like a date range. So when you're querying the API, you're pulling the API within a certain date range. So yeah, that's going to be important to use as well, because we're going to have to know the date range that we're querying, because we're going to pull the endpoint. And if we're saying, hey, between this date range and this date range, right? So if we're querying between this date range, and we do it in the first 5 seconds, and then we get a response, cool, we do all this stuff, whatever. But then if we pull it again in the next 5 seconds for a slightly different date range, right? 5 seconds, into the future, but we're probably going to get all the same data back. All of those, that contact information for all those people are going to come back if they were created within date range, and that is going to cause a problem, right? We're gonna have duplicates, and we're gonna have to deal with those duplicates. So we'll see how this whole thing shakes out. But the first thing we need to do is sort of iterate through the response, right? So how do we do that? Well, let's take the response here, the response.getBody, and let's assign that to a variable, which is what? Control Alt V? Yeah, nice. So we'll call this the body, or even the data, I don't know. So we can have that data, and then we need to iterate through it, right? So data dot matches is the list. So we're going to iterate through the list. So we can maybe do for match DTO match equals. Is that how you do it? I haven't done no, it's not equals, it's colon. And then match DTO, let's import. And what's wrong with matches? May produce null pointer. Okay. Assert data is not equal to null. Really? Can matches be null? Potentially. Assert data is not null. But well, basically we could say if data is not null. Is that what it was? Yeah. Complaining about? I think so. Let's move this code like so. All right, what's wrong with this? For statement has empty. Well, yeah, I know it has an empty body. I'm getting there. IntelliJ, cool your jets. So let's start populating, or let's start putting stuff in. So this is, step one is iterate through the response. I'm not going to leave this. Well, I might leave this comment here, but you shouldn't, right? This comment is very obvious. We're iterating through. So if you were in a professional environment, don't say iterating through the response. Yeah, we know that you're iterating through the response. But anyway, number two, check to see if the lead already exists, right? So how do we do that? Well, we need to be able to query our database. But hold on a second. We don't have a database really yet. We don't have anything in the database. So let's move this code up into the for loop, and let's start talking about the database, because we can't write this code until we have a database to interact with. So how do we do this? How do we interact with the database? Well, the first thing we need to do is figure out what the database should contain. And for now, I think the database should just contain matches, right? So the first thing we need to do is to create an entity for the match. Right now we have DTOs, data transfer objects, but that's just a way of passing data back and forth. There's no magic in that. It's just, you populate with data, you pass it here, and then you delete it, or you throw away the DTO later, and who cares, right? So it's about passing data from one place to another. But if you have an entity means this is an object, a special kind of object that is a representation of an entire database table, okay? So I want to create this. I want to have an actual entity. So let's create a package, and we can call it dot entity, and say new Java class, and we'll call this the match. We'll just call it a match. Okay. We could probably use a different word, but I think to me this is kind of like contact or contact info. I think I'm going to call it a contact. I realize that's that's not in line with the rest of the terminology. I like contact better, but anyway. Whatever. So we'll annotate this with @entity. So this comes from Jakarta persistence. What's it called? What is this called? Package. There we go. From the Jakarta persistence package. We can add it as an entity. So what this does is it essentially says, hey, this is going to represent an actual database table, right? And if you have something that represents an actual database table, you should probably have some sort of ID for it. And then we should start having things like, well, we want their email address, and we want the created @ I guess. What else is important for us to actually know? Full name, email, phone number. So those are important things for me that I want to know. String full name, private string email, phone number. What else we got? Availability, location, online, and track. So for the rest of these, and experience, for these, I'm actually not that, other than the created @ I don't really care about the experience, availability, location, online, and track, because I'm filtering by this already. So I just know I don't need to worry about this. So this kind of stuff would come from the business person, the person who understands the business rules and how it should work. So I'm kind of acting as both the business person as well as the programmer. So I just know I don't really care about tracking this stuff right now. I maybe could, but I don't think I care about tracking that. This is what I care about, right? So this is the extent to which I want to have data stored in the database. So for the ID, to properly have an ID here, we need to start annotating with stuff. So the first thing we annotate with is @ID, which comes from Jakarta persistence, and generated value, which also comes from Jakarta persistence. Generated value, we're going to pass in something called a strategy equal to identity. So what this does is this leverages something called the auto increment feature that's built into MySQL. So it's automatically going to generate an ID, a unique ID, every single time for every single new row that we put into the database. It just automatically generates a new one, so we don't have to worry about it. It handles it for us. Beautiful. For the email, this needs to have we're going to use a column annotation, also from Jakarta, persistence. We're going to have a column with the unique equals true. Sort of filter constraint is the database term. So we're going to have a constraint on this guy saying, hey, this has to be unique. So in other words, if it's not unique and we're trying to insert a new record and it's not a unique email address, we're going to throw an error. Do I need any constraints or anything on the created at? I don't think so. Full name, phone number. I mean, ideally full name should be not blank. But it's not the end of the world if it is blank. And sometimes the phone number is blank. I've seen that coming in from the data. So I think that's good enough. Now I'm going to hit Alt-Insert to generate getters and setters. So I'm going to choose to highlight all those and generate getters and setters. What else? Do I want to? I want to generate equals and hash code based on the ID. So I'll say, oh, is there no way to deselect everything? Oh, that's annoying. So based on the ID, I'll do an equals. Anything else? Maybe a toString. ToString, we'll have it output all that stuff. That's just sort of again, all this stuff comes from Java Records. Java Records kind of do this automatically for you. So you don't have to have all this verbose code. Like, there's a lot of code that we've added to it. It's 80 lines of code here. So, however, you can't use Java Records as an entity, which is kind of annoying, but I've tried. It doesn't work. So you need to have a typical class to create an entity. So, having said that, because our application properties has this guy here, when I boot up the application, it's going to then create, hopefully, it's going to create this as a table, this being match, because match is defined as an entity. It's going to try to generate a match table based on all this stuff here. So let's fire up the server and see what happens. Hopefully there's no errors. If there is, then, oh, I saw an error. I saw an error. You have an error in your SQL syntax, blah, 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 blah. Okay, stop. Is that because, yeah, so I was wondering if, so it's saying you have an error in your syntax near the word match. Match, I wonder if that's a reserved word. Typically when there's a SQL syntax error, it's one of two things. It's either the, I haven't specified a, what's it called? The dialect. The dialect. So it could be a dialect issue. So Spring Boot MySQL 8 dialect. And then this guy. Is that true? Spring JPA properties, whatever? I'm not entirely confident that's the right. It could be. Spring Boot application properties MySQL 8 dialect. Dialect. The word dialect isn't even on this. Come on, Google. The best way to configure the Hibernate dialect. I guess it is. It's Spring whatever. Okay, let's try that. So we'll paste this in here. So we're going to say, hey, I'm using a MySQL 8 DB, so please create the SQL code for MySQL 8. Oh, I just saw an error message saying something. Error in your syntax. Near match, but I thought I saw something with the word MySQL 8 dialect. MySQL 8 does not need to be specified explicitly using Hibernate dialect. Remove the property and it will be selected by default. MySQL 8 dialect has been deprecated. use this instead. Okay. Although it just said you don't have to use it. So then the other problem that we could have here, if it's not a dialect problem, it could just be that the the name match is a reserved word in SQL. You know, in MySQL maybe match is a reserved word. If it's a reserved word, then you can use the table annotation with name equal to, and you can specifically specify a different name. So we can call this again. I kind of want to say contact. We'll say contact match, right? That's like, maybe that's the best of both worlds or the worst of both worlds. I don't know. Let's just see if this succeeds, and if it does, then we know. Yeah, see, that one succeeded. So there's no error. So it was just you see it's creating the table and it's working. So it was able to create that table. Cool. So now if we go to our MySQL and we go to our, where is it? Here, and refresh the schema. Where is it? Course report API DB. We expand this out and we see contact matches here with our columns down here. I know it's hard to see if you're on a screen that has small screen or whatever. But take my word for it, the database table has been created. Fantastic. So that's one step closer to being able to start to do what we want inside of that service, which now I've lost track of. Where's the service? Here. So going back here, we'll do this in the next one. We want to check to see if the lead already exists. So in order to do that, we need to leverage something called Spring Data JPA, which we imported in way back when we were doing that first Spring initializer thing where we were generating the code and everything at the beginning, literally the first lesson, I think. So yeah, we need to go back and leverage some Spring Data JPA to actually communicate with the DB to see if this lead already exists or not. So that's what we'll jump into in the next one. Take care of yourself. Happy learning. Bye for now.